Hello, everybody. Average Gamer here, sitting down today with Edward Di Geronimo. How you doing, Ed?
Hi, everyone. Doing okay today? Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you. To start, for those who don't know, what is Antipole?
Well, it's a 2D platformer, classic-inspired games like Mega Man, Metroid, things like that have a lot of influence on it. The core hook here is you have the ability to reverse gravity at will. When you reverse gravity, it's going to affect everything around you. So enemies, anything that's not attached to the floor, the whole environment's going to change, not just you.
What originally inspired Antipole?
Probably Mega Man was the biggest influence on it. I think that a lot of the core gameplay, some of the enemy designs are based off of that. There's some hints of Metroid in there too. Some areas of the game will feel like Metroid. We didn't want to go too far down that route though. Once you get into that big open world, it takes a lot longer to make the game.
Yeah.
So we kind of focused more towards the Mega Man side to keep it constrained on development a little. We got one thing we did like to keep in. We all liked the speedrun aspect of Metroid. You get different endings for how fast you beat the game, and everybody on the team, we all would try and get the best ending in every Metroid game. So we worked that in a little bit in Antipole by putting that speed aspect into it. Like every level has a target time. We design around completing the game quickly. So that's an extra challenge in there for people that want it, but it's not a core required feature of the game.
Yeah, I noticed when I was unlocking stamps here and there, it was like, I haven't to get all of these.
One thing I liked about that aspect, it gives us a way to layer the difficulty of the game. There's several goals to each level. The base goal of just making it to the end, which is all that's required of you. But if you want more, you can try to beat the target time, which will take a lot of practice, or you can go for the coins hidden in each level. Those coins will generally take some extra skill to get. So you may need a few more tries or come back later to make sure you get them. So it balances, like the game is completable at a base skill level, and then expert players can get more if they want that. So I think that's a great way to make the game more appealing to different crowds.
Well, that's one thing I wanted to ask you about is balancing a retro-style game to modern audiences, because while there is still definitely a niche for games like Mega Man and stuff like that, there's been a bit of a broadening across all the different genres and such, so gotta imagine that's very much of a balancing game, getting all those working together. How is that, actually working out the balancing for both audiences?
I think having those optional goals is a big part of it. You can appeal to the harder crowd more. I try to keep the game fair. I don't want to have, like too many instant kills. Like they have.
Oh, you okay?
Yeah, I just in a second. I try not to do cheap deaths. I want to keep it fair, give you a chance. I keep the checkpoints in, try not to have them too far. I don't want you to feel that the game is unfair. I do a lot of play testing. I go to local events whenever anything in the indie scene, game demo nights, things like that. I try to go and get a lot of people to play. I watch. I see where people get stuck. One of the key things is to watch how people get stuck. If they're getting frustrated and walking away, you have a problem. If they're dying and smiling, that's a good challenge. And I really try to get that reaction, get people to want to get past it and make sure, they're still having fun even when they're dying. I think that's one of the big keys to it.
Keeping it challenging, not just difficult.
Yeah, like a good challenge, not an unfair challenge.
And speaking of challenges, this is you redesigning some aspects and re-releasing Antipole as Antipole DX. So how has that been designing on top of your old designs? Because there's been like a 5 or so year gap between the release of the original game and now.
I'm looking at the original as a prototype. I've got like it's a very complete prototype essentially. You've got a whole game there roughed out, but I've had time to see how people reacted to it. I've had time away from it, so I can see the flaws in it more clearly. When you're banging at something every day, a lot of the flaws you get used to and just ignore them. You would learn to adjust and don't even think about them. But then when you take some time away and come back to it, it hits you right away. Like this could be
Fresh set
better.
of eyes.
And so I think that's helped a lot to improve what's there. Another big thing I did was sometimes with design, you get a rough idea and you put it there and then you tune it until it feels okay. And you generally stay in the same general area. But this time around, like I made bigger changes. Like I changed the speed of the player a lot. I changed the physics. I made big changes and then tried tuning again. And I found a very different sweet spot. I feel like it controls a lot tighter in this game than it did in the original. Get a little more precision, less slipperiness, I guess, kind of. You can be more precise than you could, whereas the old one, I tried to keep it fast. And not that this one isn't fast. I still think it's a fast-paced game, but it's a different sweet spot, and I think it gives you a better overall game.
Okay. And speaking also in general, the whole 2D scene, that's a very big thing for indie devs. There's a very big focus on 2D. What do you think draws so many independent developers towards 2D games and retro style games?
Some of it is this is what I grew up with. So I've spent many years thinking, long before I had the ability to make a game myself, I would think about things. What would be a cool game? What wouldn't? So now that I can make a game, I've got all these years of thinking about it in my head already. Some of it is it's in order of magnitude easier to make a 2D game than a 3D game. You can make a 2D game with just a couple people without too much trouble. When you get into 3D, if you want to get it good, you need one person to create the model, another person to rig it, somebody else to do the animations. The coding on that to make it all look good is a lot more complex. You need a much bigger team to do a quality job on a 3D game. So if you have a limited budget, then you can make a high-end 2D game or a low-end 3D game. So I think most people are going to focus on high-end 2D game in that scenario.
And speaking as well on indie development, what got you into making indie games? What got you started there? I mean, obviously you loved this sort of style of game, but what got you making them?
Well, I'm just outside New York, over northern New Jersey, and when I started out, got out of college, started looking into jobs and everything, I wanted to make games, but at the time there weren't many opportunities in the New York area. Most of the development was off more towards the West Coast, Texas, maybe Boston if you're on the East Coast, but New York area there was very little. When it did start up, it mostly started in things more like Facebook games or mobile. So if I wanted to make games, I was gonna have to do it myself. I did eventually get into making PS games in New York, but by that point I had already started down this path, making a few games, and so I just kept going.
Awesome. And were there any surprising twists and turns in returning to Antipole when creating Antipole DX?
I hinted on it a little earlier with tweaking the controls and the physics. I think with the time away, like what was there just felt wrong. and I was able to come up with something better by changing it drastically and seeing where it led. There were like a few things along that lines, like things that seemed right before. I just changed them to force myself to look at it and see. Some I went back to what was there, some I didn't. I had some things I wanted to do originally, like we kept thinking it'd be cool to have this like, fancy animation every time you flip gravity, show you flipping over. So we spent a lot of time trying to animate that, and then we realized you're flipping so fast, this game is so fast paced, you need to keep the action fast. We can't have a delay while you flip. So in that case, some of the ideas I had were wrong, and this enabled me to see, hey, I actually did that right the first time, even though I didn't like it.
And what would you say is your favorite part of Antipole DX?
I think about that one. In general, I really like the way the game came out on the 3DS. I think that's a great platform for it. It's great for that pick up and play when you have a few minutes with the control. I think it looks best when you play on the 3DS with the 3D on. That's one thing I really think added a lot to the game. I do a lot of my development on PCs. It's faster there, and then I test on consoles periodically. And every time I jump to the 3DS version from PC, I feel like, oh wow, this is great. And that's one of the things.
So the 3DS version actually has full 3D effects, even though it's 2D. So you got kind of a 2D, 2.5D effect thing going on?
Well, I mean, if you played something like, say, Shovel Knight on the 3DS, like all those parallax layers to the game now have 3D depth. So that if you're playing on PC, say the far background, we fake a 3D feel by giving it a darker color scheme, scrolling slower. But when you're playing on the 3DS, it actually looks further away. There's some distance between you and those background layers.
Gives it depth.
Right. And it feels kind of like a pop-up book in a way. I've heard people describe it that way a lot. But you have that, it feels like there's depth to it. Things like when there's explosions, you got some 3D motion to that. There's, you'll get explosions front, behind things. You'll get particles moving in 3D. It adds a lot to it. It feels a lot nicer.
What advice do you have for other developers interested in following your stead, who are interested in trying to do indie dev?
I would say pick something that you care about. You want to keep some passion to it. It's hard to work. It's hard to force yourself to finish something you don't care about. But make sure to keep a realistic goal. Put limits on yourself. Don't go and try and create the greatest game ever. If you do that, you're never going to finish. So, like I mentioned earlier, I love Metroid, but I knew if I tried to make that big open world, it would take forever. So
scope would expand way too big.
So I kept down to the linear levels, which I think ended up working great with this gameplay. If anything, it was better, but in here it kept scope down and enabled me to actually finish. So I think you need to keep that end in sight and make sure you can reach it at all times.
And speaking as someone who does have a fair bit of experience and you're getting this whole new game out, what's something you'd like to try in the future once Antipole DX has hit the wild and everybody's playing it?
Say that again?
What's something you'd like to try after Antipole X... Sorry. What's something you'd like to try after Antipole DX releases? A new product. What's something that you'd like to toy around with as a new game?
I think at some point I do want to go down that Metroid style route. It's always been what I've wanted to do, but I've kind of held back to get more experience, get things done first. But I think I got to go down that route at some point.
Well, there's definitely still people for. I mean, Shovel Knight, or not, Hollow Knight. Hollow Knight. Got lots of Knights coming out recently, but Hollow Knight, that one, they did the Metroidvania thing because they hand drew it because apparently it wasn't hard enough.
Wow.
It's crazy.
That is, like I said, you got to put some limit somewhere to get this done. It's impressive to.
All right, and while we got a few minutes left, is there anything you'd like to ask me or my audience?
I'm blanking at the moment.
It's okay if you don't have a question. Just like ask all my interviewees at the end of our interviews.
I'm blanking.
That's okay. And seriously, thank you for sitting down with me, Ed. It's been a pleasure.
All right, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
All right, cheers.